Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. And here's another episode of Challenger Network News. I'm Brandon Bichler, partner at Elixir, and I'm very pleased to welcome my partner at Elixir, Dieter Halfar. Dieter, welcome.
Hi,
Happy
Brandon.
Friday.
Thank you. Same to you.
How you doing?
Yeah, all good. End of the week's always a good thing.
End of the week's always a good thing. Absolutely. I always say I'm going to have a glass of wine next time on a future episode. It never seems to happen, but it will happen. So wherever you are in the world, we hope that you're having a good Friday and getting ready for the weekend. So we have a really interesting topic to talk about today. We're going to talk about non-fungible tokens. I don't know if everyone knows what that is. We'll do an attempt to explain that a little bit up front. But there's been some really interesting things in the news happening this week. This world of non-fungible tokens is really exploding. Again, we'll deep dive into a little bit about what it is. But essentially, people like the NBA has gotten massively involved. We'll talk a little bit about what they're doing. Artists such as Kings of Leon they're about to launch their album, and they're going to use three different non-fungible tokens for some really cool things that they're going to do there. Grimes, who's a musician and artist, one of my favorite, I have to say. Shout out to Grimes. Has just made, I just saw something like 5.8 million in under 20 minutes selling her digital art collection, War Nymph, on a NFT trading platform, Nifty Gateway. So so Dieter, why don't we, for those who don't know what non-fungible tokens are, why don't we start off with what the heck are these things?
As you say, Brandon, I'll give it an attempt in terms of explaining. But I mean, simply, if you kind of break down the word non-fungible and token, so I'll start with the token bit because that's kind of really easy to understand, in my opinion. A digital token, is really a digital certificate of ownership, right? So it's this idea that there's a digital certificate that represents ownership over an asset, and that asset could be a physical asset or it could be a digital asset. In this case, a lot of these NFTs are actually underpinned by digital assets. So you would have heard, reference to tokens like crypto kitties or digital art, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of collectibles and the art scene throughout these 15 minutes. We can't possibly cover all of the asset types and the use cases, but there's definitely interesting stuff happening in that space. So the first thing is the tokens really is this digital certificate. The fungible and the non-fungible, the non-fungible part here really refers to the fact that these are assets that are unique. They cannot be replaced, and they're not interchangeable with any other asset of that type. So the easiest way to understand it is actually thinking about the reverse. The dollar, the pound, gold, even Bitcoin, these are identical assets. If I have one Bitcoin and you've got one Bitcoin, they are fungible, they're interchangeable. But NFTs, they are unique, not just because they might be one of them, but they've got unique characteristics and attributes, and that makes them non-fungible.
That's right. In fact, we've been doing a lot of work in the whole alternative investment space. And, one of the things that I learned doing some work last year is just how much venture capital money is being poured into this world of alternative assets, whether it's property, investing in trade receivables, investing in hedge funds, investing in venture capital funds, and of course, as we're talking about today, art and collectibles. A lot of that has been physical objects that you can invest in through these platforms. For example, you can invest in a classic car and even own a fractional share, have a fractional ownership of that classic car.
Yeah.
But this world of NFTs, which I think is really interesting, is we're moving from physical assets to digital assets that have value. So in the case of the NBA NFT platform, NBA Top Shop, and we'll include a link on NBA Top Shop, which is huge. I mean, I was looking, maybe the number's gone up since I looked at it, but they've sold nearly $270 million worth of unique NBA video highlights. So you can own a video highlight that is yours, but it's a digital asset. And in the case of the Grimes art that we talked about, this is not art that you necessarily, physical art that you put on your wall. This is digital art that you might use in a display in your home, or however you'd like to use it. Put it on your social channels, whatever you'd like to do. But it's a digital asset, which is quite different, isn't it, Dieter?
Yeah, it is very interesting. I mean, I'm personally not a big art fan. It's something that still kind of fascinates me in terms of how people put value to a painting. And the one thing that strikes me on the digital art bit is that now it's even more, I think it's even harder to actually estimate the value of these items, because to me, frankly, I'm not an art expert, and if I have to put my money into an NFT and get into the digital art game, I'll probably lose a ton because I probably back the wrong thing. But yeah, it's fascinating to think about the concept of digital art. There's a whole lot of implications around the ownership of what that means for ownership. As you say, this is not a painting that you hang on your wall. Although I do see now there's a couple of guys out there, and I was reading some Reddit posts around people that have actually built technology to be able to access the marketplace and then project that onto your wall, so at least you can display it. But right, the concept of what it means to own a JPEG or a GIF, and to have that certificate is quite different and far removed from the good old times where I could buy a piece of art and stick it on my wall and it's mine.
Yeah, I mean, Dieter, I thought you were much more cultured than you're giving yourself credit for, not being a big art fan. But it is interesting. So, I mean, I think one aspect is, I think you said something that was really important, is how do you place value? How do you have trust in the value of this asset? If you're not an art expert, how does it get curated? How do you have, how can you rely on the value of the piece of art? And then also in some of these NFTs, sometimes in this kind of pop culture, fads can happen where things can massively increase in value, although we've kind of seen it on the stock market recently lately too. But things can go up in value. It's not based on a fundamental, it's based on taste. It's based on taste and based on people's value that people place on an emotion that's attached to this thing. So does it mean that you need experts, just like we have in the physical art world? You need curators, you need experts, you have people that value things and tell you this is what it's worth. But you also, what's interesting here is you have a marketplace that's online. You have a blockchain which can record the value and record the ownership. So do you think that those elements, those infrastructure elements could change the way that this whole art world moves forward, I guess?
I mean, undoubtedly. I think, there's a couple of things at play. So you talk about, the propensity for potential, hype driving prices. This is something that we've seen not just in NFTs, and we're still seeing it in NFTs, and we're going to continue seeing that because it's still a very fast-moving small market. I think the market size of NFTs recorded kind of by end of 2020 was only like $250 million. In terms of size, that's still tiny compared to some of these very large crypto markets out there. If you think about the DeFi market alone, you're talking about $10 billion of value locked into DeFi. These are small markets, which means they are absolutely open for manipulation. There's very low levels of price discovery for some of these assets already as it is. Do I think that will change as the market grows? I do think it will change. And you touched on an interesting thing, the idea that there's now a marketplace and a venue created for retail investors and the ordinary man in the street, me and you, to be able to participate in buying assets that perhaps we couldn't access before because we didn't have access to the channels, we couldn't explore these venues. Means that I think that there's a lot more people that can potentially be attracted to these markets. I think that will give some price stability over time, but I think there's some time before we'll see the volatility of these asset prices actually settle. So I think it's a function of the size of the market. So we'll see some volatility, and that gives rise to a lot of opportunity, right? If you're a speculator right now and you can actually pick a piece of digital art that you think is going to be the next best thing, it means you stand a chance to make a lot of money, but also lose a lot. So I think therein it's a function of size and time. I think that the idea of potentially illiquid assets, and you touched on concepts in the real estate and say the classic car space. Although there are digital assets, the ones that I get excited about are really probably more traditional illiquid assets that only the absolute wealthy and knowledgeable can access. And these pieces of art in the physical world or classic cars that actually get tokenized and fractionalized, I think there's some excitement in that, because not only does that create liquidity in the market and better price discovery, but as I say, the chance to own a piece of an asset that I could otherwise not afford is quite attractive. And if that's linked to your passion, I like that. I like the fact that NFTs are linked to something that people inherently love doing. They might be collecting sports trading cards or stamps or something. This is, the space of collectibles is an emotional thing. And I think that's the last point I'll make on this, right? Is to me is that the difference between a traditional piece of art and a piece of digital art is really that piece of physical art there's some history behind it. It might have been touched by greatness. It might be a painting of the Mona Lisa, touched by Leonardo himself. And it's difficult, I suppose, to kind of recreate that same thing in the digital world. But I think the fact that it's on the blockchain and something that it's unique, right? That's what this thing is all about. As long as it's unique and it's immutable and that record cannot change, and you've got something that in your hand that nobody else can easily replicate, I think that can add some value over time. Still a big around which one.
Yeah, a lot of really good points in there, and I want to encourage those of you who are watching live to join in the debate and ask us a question, and we'd love to answer it just by posting in the comments on whichever channel you are watching us on. Keith Bear just posted an example of NFT shaking some foundations, something about Banksy and the crypto world that be sure to check out off the back of this. When you talk about the passion, the passion of these assets, they're not assets. I grew up collecting baseball cards, and actually they're physical cards that still sit somewhere in my garage back in Texas somewhere. They shouldn't be in the garage, by the way. They should be in a climate-controlled environment, of course. But yeah, I mean, that it means a lot. And it was, of course, it's about the value, but more importantly, it's about having that rookie card, having that unique thing that is really important, and it just represents something very special. For example, the Kings of Leon, they're going to, I don't know all the exact details, but they're going to produce and release a first special album package, so you can have access to the limited edition albums. It'll be kind of like something that very few people will be able to have. They're also, I read something, I thought this was super interesting, going to release an NFT for, you can go to any Kings of Leon concert at any time, anywhere in the world.
Lifetime ticket. Lifetime
ticket.
Yeah.
And you talk about a passion project, and that's something that you're passionate about. That's exactly what it's all about, isn't it? It's about having ownership or access to something that you love. If you're an NBA fan, what they're doing with NBA Top Shop. I think that's super interesting. In fact, I wonder. There's a couple of angles there, but is this an exciting new revenue stream opportunity for all kinds of businesses today that they should all be looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the entertainment and the artist industry, I think has been, there was an interesting comment in that Kings of Leon announcement that talks about the devaluation of music in the last 20 years. Music's just gotten cheaper and cheaper, and finally, I think that this represents an opportunity for artists to really take back control and create new revenue streams. The idea of a social NFT coin or a social NFT is quite something interesting. We've seen on the back of COVID-19 how some of these revenue streams of these artists were completely decimated. They just couldn't tour. A lot of that income that they would have generated from these events just wiped out. And a lot of them had to resort to other means of making money. And NFTs have given them, a completely new revenue stream. I saw one which was very interesting. You could buy an NFT for an event that was beer pong with Post Malone, right? So it's absolutely bizarre what people buy, but it might be quite cool to play
each their own. Yeah,
absolutely. But you're 100% right. New revenue streams, and what I particularly like when I was looking at some of the assets, whether that's in the music industry or back to kind of digital art, is the fact that these smart contracts, when you mint them, are set up to actually create wrappers around these assets that then essentially sit around these assets for the lifetime of this asset, means that these artists can earn money every time this asset is sold. There's a reseller's fee, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4, 5% of the value that is attached to these assets, and as they transfer ownership, the original artist can continue earning very much like the royalty system. Apart from one thing, it goes to the artist.
Yeah. Okay. Final thing, and then we'll have to wrap up for the week, because as you know, this show's pretty rapid every week. But is this just a bit like of a fad and a passing fad? And as soon as we're out of lockdowns, we're going to go back to the physical world, or is this something that's really here to stay? What do you think, Dieter?
I think it's here to stay. I think the fact that we spoke about the new revenue streams, I think that is undeniably a business opportunity that people are going to continue exploring. There are some serious shortcomings of NFTs that needs to be solved before I think it goes absolutely mainstream. For instance, I'm concerned still about the safekeeping of these assets. I think it's one thing to own the certificate. when you link that to the actual digital asset, where does that digital asset reside? Somewhere out on the internet. It might be sitting on a marketplace. How secure is that? How secure is your asset when an artist disappears? Where that needs to be housed. The token standard is quite clear about ownership, but it doesn't indicate where that actual asset resides. And I think that's something that the industry is working hard to solve. So I think that, plus the inevitable scaling issues of Ethereum in terms of being able to, the minting cost to actually get the smart contract and wallet set up, anywhere between $50 and $250 for a digital artist to actually get that smart wallet set up. That's quite limiting in terms of the people's ability to participate in this market. So I think Ethereum needs to scale, and the custody and safekeeping of the assets need to be solved for long term. But then I think after that, we'll have a good chance.
Well, I have to admit, in research that I did a few years ago, we found that the most innovation happens when you have new infrastructure that enables absolutely new things to happen. And this is, I think, a case where we do have something that in the blockchain and everything that's enabling that we've been talking about for years. But here's yet another example of where the infrastructure, people just build on top of new infrastructure, and that's what we're doing here. We have people building on top of it. So more to come here. I do want to wrap it up with Colin McArdle. You've left us a question. We don't have time to answer it here, but we'll and Joel Mann, we'll definitely engage with you. Yeah, we'll engage with you in the comments after the show, and we'd love for you to stay on and engage with us there. We'll do that. Dieter, thank you for joining this week, and we look forward to seeing you next week on Challenger Network News. For everyone, have a happy weekend. See you next week.